Joe.
Across the great state of Iowa, it is the Simon Conway Show. It's Wednesday, and I don't know about you, but I love this share economy. You know, we've got ride share. You can stay in people's living rooms on a sofa bed. You got all this stuff going on, and I absolutely love it because I love entrepreneurs and I like people making money. But there appears to be a small problem with Airbnb. That problem being hidden cameras. I've got to admit, it never even entered my head that people might do this, but apparently 1 in 10 have discovered hidden cameras, so we thought we'd find out what the legal situation was. We are about to talk to Quentin Brogdon. He is a legal expert, more than 25 years in courtrooms. He's a former prosecutor. Quentin, you're very welcome. How are you, sir?
Good afternoon, Simon. Thanks for having me on.
You're welcome. So, as a former prosecutor, if they don't disclose to me there's a hidden camera in my room that I'm renting, do I have a case?
Well, you know, there are two issues. One is criminal and one is civil. The upside of this new sharing economy is convenience and the inexpensive nature of it. But we're now learning more about the downside, and it's not just Airbnb, it's Uber, it's Lyft. There's danger. When you get with strangers, you don't know who you're getting with, who has access to the Airbnb, whether there are hidden cameras. We all grew up hearing don't hitchhike. Now we jump into Ubers and Lyfts. We grew up hearing be careful around strangers. Now we don't think twice about going into a stranger's home. And so if someone is surreptitiously videotaping you, you know, in the nude, for instance, without your permission, certainly that can be a violation of criminal statutes in the particular state. In addition, most states, including my home state of Texas, have causes of action for invasion of privacy where you can sue for damages. But the problem is, Airbnb, for example, their attitude is we're just a broker. We put you together with the renter, but don't look to us if there's a problem. Anything can be done with consent, but Airbnb's position, according to some of the reporting, is that even if a camera is shown as a tiny white dot in a picture that you saw before you rented the place, somehow you were aware of the video camera and you consented to it as long as it wasn't in a bedroom or a bathroom.
Right.
Most people wouldn't agree with that position.
No, exactly. So here's the thing. I mean, you're right. We're getting into strangers' cars when we were told never to hitchhike, but they're not entirely strangers because there's a part of us, and I use rideshare companies. I use more than one rideshare company. So I use rideshare companies, and I am kind of relying on Uber and Lyft and the others to have done their job when it comes to background checking their drivers. I'm assuming they know. Admittedly, I don't know, but I'm assuming they know who is picking me up and dropping me off.
Well, that's what most people assume, and it's interesting. Some of these companies, including Uber, Lyft, and Airbnb, some would argue at least, create and perpetuate that thought and that reliance. But when a problem arises, I've represented women who are raped by drivers in these rideshare companies, for instance. The rideshare company takes the position, we're just a broker. We don't really, we're not responsible. This person, how could we have known? And for instance, taxi drivers are checked more carefully in most cities than some of these rideshare drivers at Uber and Lyft are. The same, I would say, it appears is true with Airbnb. There's only so much they can do and will do, and once there's a problem, you're treated more as a frustrated guest by Airbnb, at least according to some of these tenants, than you are a victim of a crime.
So staying in people's homes, this has actually been going on a long time. So, for example, when I first came to the United States, I was a property manager before I was on the radio, and I was looking after, I lived in Orlando. So if you owned a home in Orlando, you hired somebody like me to make sure it was clean, to check in your guests, to check out your guests, to be available on Christmas Day if the TV broke. That happened to me one year, seriously. And one of the places, really, yeah, it's amazing. One of the places that I advertised in order to fill these places was a company called VRBO, which is Vacation Rentals by Owner. I advertised on there to get people to come and stay in these houses that I was looking after. And, in actual fact, I just went back to Florida because my youngest daughter got married, and I stayed in a VRBO place that I found on their website. I've not ever used an Airbnb. I don't know why. There's something that isn't quite clicking in my head, and it's not the sharing economy, because I've been involved in that for a very long time. Airbnb strikes me as having an issue, and I'm not 100% sure what it was, but 1 in 10 Airbnb renters have discovered hidden cameras. Seems to be feeding into my nervousness over this company.
That's a concerning figure. I mean, and you might say, well, 90% of them haven't discovered them. That doesn't mean they weren't there.
Right.
And furthermore, if you're one of the 10 out of 100 who's being videotaped and possibly your images looked at or put on the internet, you don't care whether there were 90 out of 100 who were not. You've been harmed, and a legal recourse doesn't necessarily get the nude pictures of you off of the internet readily. So, and suing an individual is problematic in most states because it's difficult to collect money from individuals. And if you try to sue Airbnb, their position, no doubt, appears to be, and consistently, why are you looking at us?
Is this not just a matter of...
realized it or not.
I'm sorry, Quentin. Isn't this just a matter of time? I mean, aren't we sooner or later going to see somebody successfully sue Airbnb or Lyft or Uber as having more responsibility than they wish to claim? Isn't it just a matter of time till we find the right courtroom and the right jury, the right judge?
Sure. I think just because they're arguing that they're not responsible doesn't mean that they are not responsible. Most would say, including myself, that even if you claim to just be brokering people, that the reasonable expectation of someone renting a home or jumping into an Uber or a Lyft is that the company, Uber, Lyft, Airbnb, has done some screening of that individual, and you're not being paired with an axe murderer. And so, yes, I think the law sometimes is a little behind the reality, but that most people would think would be a fair and a just outcome to hold the company accountable for basic checking of who these people are,
right?
And basic maintenance of controls.
Because they're definitely, certainly with the rideshare companies, there is an assumption, and I'm one of them that has that assumption, that these rideshare companies have indeed background checked their drivers, and we are driving around in safety. That is my expectation. That is what I truly believe when I get into one, and I get into them all the time. And sometimes I'll send my girlfriend off in one without me. So I do indeed feel that way. Otherwise, I wouldn't behave that way. It's very interesting. So this company has done a survey. They're called IPX 1031. I've never heard of them, but they've done a survey, and they surveyed more than 2,000 Airbnb customers. They found out that 58% of renters worry about a hidden camera. That's a staggering number. And they said 11% of renters actually found a hidden camera. That 58% number's staggering, isn't it?
It is, and again, I think it bears repeating. If 11%, 11 out of 100 found cameras,
yep,
probably there were more. Those were just the cameras that were found.
Yep.
And some of it is innocent recording in the sense that somebody's recording to make sure the renter doesn't trash their home or steal their belongings. But that doesn't excuse it if you're walking around in your pajamas or your underwear, that some stranger's watching you in a camera if you haven't consented to it, whether it's being watched real time or over the internet, or maybe even it's hacked and someone's looking at you who is not even supposed to be or not even have permission to look at you in a camera in a situation where you don't even realize you're being videotaped.
Right, Mark Zuckerberg covers his camera on his home computer. I do the same thing with mine, by the way. I do, and I'm not paranoid in any way. I don't live my life like that. I'm not constantly scared. And as I say, I use rideshare companies all the time. But Airbnb has always bothered me because I don't think they're checking out who's doing the renting in the manner in which they should. Is it going to take maybe a state legislator legislature, to start creating more rules and regulations for them?
Here's what's happened, unfortunately. Our legislators at the state level and federally are susceptible to donations and political pressure. And unfortunately, we, the individuals, don't mass together often enough and come together and advocate safety reforms. But these companies, for instance, I know Uber and Lyft, for example, they have gone legislature to legislature to legislature to preempt. There were certain states in certain cities in my home state of Texas who were requiring Uber and Lyft to do things that they didn't do, nationwide. And Uber and Lyft got a law passed by the state of Texas that prevents those cities from requiring more than Uber and Lyft are already doing. And so Airbnb is the same kind of approach. The dollars involved are so big that they motivate and justify these companies to go to the legislators to push back and to keep necessary changes, many would argue, from occurring at the legislative level.
So you told us that you've had clients who have been, I'm going to say unfortunately, that doesn't even go close to the reality of the word that's in my head, been raped by rideshare drivers. So who did you sue and what was the outcome?
Well, I can't talk about outcomes. I can tell you I filed several lawsuits involving women who were raped and assaulted by rideshare drivers. And as you've investigated this, CNN did a report on ride sharing, for instance, that found there were many, many assaults that weren't reported. And it turns out these rideshare companies do not screen the drivers to the same degree that most taxi cabs do. And taxi cabs traditionally have been highly regulated by the cities. So, for instance, Uber and Lyft, at least last time I checked, do not fingerprint the drivers, which is the gold standard for checking someone's criminal record, whereas most taxi companies operating in cities are required to do that. So the degree of checking that's done on a taxi cab driver for a criminal record is greater, more times than not, than the degree of checking that's done on an Uber and Lyft driver.
Amazing stuff. Quentin Brogdon is a lawyer, clearly. He was a prosecutor for many years. He's had more than 25 years in a courtroom. You can find out more at Crain, that's C-R-A-I-N, crainlewis.com if you want to find out more about Quentin. We will have you back, sir. A fascinating conversation. I really appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me on, Simon. It is a fascinating area of the law and of society.
You are more than welcome. So, ladies and gentlemen, what do you make of all of that? I mean, it really is fascinating. I'm curious to know what some of you guys do with this stuff. Well, that's going to do it for today, ladies and gentlemen.